I don't know if you've read this. It's in all the bestseller lists. Don't bother if you haven't. It's so silly. It starts with someone being killed in one of the corridors here at the Louvre in Paris. This chap is the keeper of an ancient secret, and if he dies, the ancient secret dies with him. So he crawls along the long corridor and seeks out the most famous painting in the Louvre. And there he scrawls a secret message on the glass that protects the Mona Lisa. Now, the Mona Lisa has long been a magnet for mystery addicts and fruitcakes. You want mysteries? She's got loads of them. The mystery of her elusive identity, the mystery of her elusive smile. It's even been said she's a projected self-portrait of Leonardo as a cross-dresser. Even her eyebrows are mysterious. Why hasn't she got any? But there is one mystery concerning the Mona Lisa that can actually be solved, and we're going to do it in this film. It's perhaps the deepest mystery of all, and that is why, out of all the countless old masters gathered in all our museums, why did this particular one become the most famous painting in the world? Now that's a mystery worth solving. The Mona Lisa is 500 years old. She was painted in Florence in around 1503. In Paris, they've recently been celebrating her birthday. 500 years old. It's a good age. But the first thing to grasp about the Mona Lisa's ridiculous fame is that it's rather new. For 300 years after she was painted, the Mona Lisa was almost entirely unknown. Just a handful of people in history had ever seen her or even heard of her. She only started to become famous about 150 years ago, and really, really famous, this famous, in the 20th century. So her fame is rather new. So, by the way, is the fame of her creator, Leonardo da Vinci. Today we think of Leonardo as the greatest genius of the Renaissance. Scientist, mathematician, anatomist. The man who not only painted the Mona Lisa, but who also invented flying machines, submarines, and bicycles. And it's just not true. I'm not saying that Leonardo didn't vaguely imagine some of those things, but I am saying that he never actually built any of them. Leonardo almost discovered lots of things, but only almost. His tragedy is that he never went the final mile, the bit that counts.
Well, Leonardo was not that celebrated. One of the problems is that Leonardo did not paint very much. Whereas Raphael was on a production line, one after the other. Michelangelo did the whole ceiling, after all, on walls of the Sistine Chapel. I mean, huge project in 4 years, which is what apparently, it took Leonardo to paint, this tiny portrait. So if you wanted, lots of work, you were not going to ask him.
You know that famous drawing that people always say is him? The old man with the big biblical beard and the all-seeing eyes. Well, there's no actual evidence. It's Leonardo, just our wishful thinking. Because this old man with the big beard reminds us of some great biblical leader, doesn't he? Moses, perhaps, or even God. So the next thing to get clear in our minds is that Leonardo da Vinci is chiefly, like this, a work of fiction. And before we tiptoe any further into the conceptual quagmire that is the mystery of the Mona Lisa, I think we need to find out a tad more about the real Leonardo. Olives. They're everywhere on this hill. In fact, just about the only thing that's up here is olive groves. We're about 2 kilometers out of Vinci, little Tuscan town of Vinci. a place called Anciano, about 20 miles out of Florence. And this simple little Tuscan hill house is the house in which Leonardo da Vinci was born in 1452. His father was a notary, a lawyer, called Ser Piero da Vinci, and his mother, all we know about her is that she was called Caterina, and Leonardo was their illegitimate son. Leonardo's father bought this house from the friars that used to own it. He was working for them as a lawyer, and it's hardly changed since then. It's just two very basic little rooms, really, lovingly preserved in their original state of decrepitude. But look at this, just above the window on the front. A lion wearing a helmet. That's the coat of arms of the Da Vinci family. Original fireplace. Leonardo. Ghastly likeness, I think. Coat of arms again. It's rather spooky feeling, actually. It's such a humble place for such a big brain to have been born. Leonardo's artistic career is so frustrating. He's always starting things and never finishing them. He spent the first 30 years of his life in Florence, yet all he had to show for all this time was a couple of pictures. One of them is this gorgeous portrait of Ginevra de' Benci. She's rather glum. Why? In Italian, Ginevra means juniper, so the halo of juniper around her head is a coded clue to her identity. From the start, Leonardo could make his women feel mysterious. Here's an early Madonna and Child that hangs in the Hermitage in Russia. What a ghastly, multi-pounded Jesus. Look at the size of him. I don't like her expression either. It looks forced to me. Say cheese. Cheese. These early experiments with different women's expressions had such mixed results that Leonardo soon settled on one he knew he could rely on, an expression he always used. You know it already. It's that mysterious smile playing on a woman's lips. Whether they're the Virgin Mary or a girl off the street, Leonardo began giving his women the same look. The Mona Lisa's mysterious smile was an expression he was churning out. For the next 20 years, Leonardo worked in Milan as the in-house genius for the local dukes, starting lots of things, finishing none of them, except this. The Last Supper, the famous masterpiece that's been falling off the wall ever since he painted it, because the technique he used was so lousy. After 20 years in Milan, he returned to Florence. He was already in his 50s when a commission came his way that would finally lead to his most famous achievement. A portrait of a plumpish Florentine merchant's wife named Lisa Gherardini. There are lots of extraordinary surprises in the story of the Mona Lisa, but perhaps the earliest of them is that story begins here, in this grim little Florentine street called the Via della Stufa. Now, this is the street in which Lisa Gherardini, who is traditionally thought to have been the Florentine lady who posed for the Mona Lisa, actually lived. She was married to a Florentine cloth merchant called Francesco del Giaconde, and that explains why in France she's known as La Gioconde, why in Italy they call her La Gioconda, and why, rather confusingly, the rest of us call her Mona Lisa, Madonna Lisa. It's what everybody would have said to her. Madonna Lisa becomes Mona Lisa. Thus, in this grim little Florentine street, populated these days chiefly by Florentine lowlife, the great legend of the Mona Lisa was born. For some reason, Leonardo never handed over the Mona Lisa to Francisco del Giocondo and his wife, probably because he never considered her finished. He was such a fiddler. Leonardo's career was now on the slide. In Italy, he was out of fashion, and his reputation for not finishing things preceded him wherever he wandered. Internationally, what fame he had was due entirely to his much-copied comic grotesques of ugly old men and big-nosed Jews. They're rather racist, really. It was the French king Francois I who saved Leonardo by taking him in when no one else would have him. Francois invited the 64-year-old multitasker to work for him in France in this chateau at Amboise on the Loire. Leonardo brought the Mona Lisa with him and no doubt fiddled with her some more. When he died here 3 years later, in 1519, the Mona Lisa entered the French royal collection and to all intents and purposes disappeared for 300 years.
And then the first great break for the Mona Lisa, the first great career move, as I would put it, the French Revolution. What the French Revolution does, apart from minor things like abolishing the monarchy and so on, is to transform the Louvre into a museum. So at least she's now gone from, semi-obscurity to a proper place. Another thing is Napoleon. Napoleon took a shine to many women, and one of these was Mona Lisa, and indeed for, I think, 4 years, the Mona Lisa was removed from public viewing and was in Napoleon's bedroom. And then it was put back in the Louvre and has remained there ever since.
You know, before Napoleon carried the Mona Lisa away to his bedroom, hardly anyone had seen her, and no one thought of her as this figure of mystery and allure. She was a portrait by Leonardo, and that's it. But now that she was in the Louvre, and the Louvre was open to the public, she was ready to fall into the clutches of the public imagination. And so her ludicrous journey to global fame could finally begin. Hang on to your hats, because we're taking you on it. When we left you, the Mona Lisa had just got to the Louvre, and people could finally see what she looked like. They liked what they saw, but had trouble agreeing on what it was. Then, as now, everyone found something different in the Mona Lisa.
In the middle of the 19th century, some intellectuals and writers begin to discuss the Mona Lisa as the most formidable example of the femme fatale. This is when the smile becomes mysterious and enigmatic. There is no mention of an enigmatic smile with the Mona Lisa. I mean, basically, until about 1850, Mona Lisa is a cheerful housewife. From 1850 onwards, she is a castrating female.
You won't believe some of the silly things that began to be written about her by the feverish blokes of the 19th century. Let me read you something here. It's perhaps the most famous passage ever written about the Mona Lisa by an eccentric English Epicurean called Walter Pater, who was obsessed with her. "She is older than the rocks among which she sits," he gushed in 1873. "Like the vampire, she's been dead many times and learned the secrets of the grave and been a diver in deep seas." It just goes on and on. I mean, this isn't art history. This is stalking. The Mona Lisa had begun to drive men mad. Thus the Mona Lisa entered the creative imagination of the 19th century, where she would have stayed, famous among writers and art critics, and that's about it, if something else hadn't happened, something sensational, something that turned her into a public celebrity.
Well, of course, you needed an event, you needed a photo opportunity, and that occurred in the shape of an Italian workman, Vincenzo Perugia, who stole the painting in August 1911 and kept it for 2 years in his bedsit, not far from the Louvre, near the stove. The Mona Lisa is a piece of wood, so you can imagine the possibility, the terrible possibilities. And that made the world press. Every day, for 3-4 weeks, there was something about the Mona Lisa. The police can't find it. The security of the Louvre is terrible. The director of the Department of Paintings had to resign. You know, it became a sort of cause célèbre, so people could see the Mona Lisa nearly every day as they were having their breakfast.
So why would anyone be so stupid as to steal the Mona Lisa? Various conspiracy theories were aired at the time, and indeed, people have been airing them ever since. The likeliest answer is that the entire mad plot was the handiwork of an Argentinian forger called Eduardo de Valfierno. Valfierno's crazy idea was to produce a handful, perhaps 6 or 7 copies of the Mona Lisa while he had it in his hands, and then to sell these copies on to some very, very gullible American millionaires. Now, this has never been proved. What's certain is that if you were a very gullible American millionaire, you would hardly have popped up afterwards and said, yes, I bought one of these. And undoubtedly, there were these very special copies floating around the European art world after the theft. However, once Valfierno had done his dirty deed and produced his copies, he no longer had any real need for the painting itself. So he handed it back to his accomplice, Perugia, and Perugia was stuck with the Mona Lisa, a painting that the whole world was looking for. What was he going to do with it? Perugia must have realized that the painting was far too hot to do anything with in France. So he came back here to Italy, and he holed up in this hotel in Florence, which used to be called the Tripoli Italia, but which, not surprisingly, has now changed its name to the Gioconda, because it's in this hotel that the great lost painting was finally found. Perugia contacted a Florentine antique dealer called Alfredo Geri and offered to sell him the Mona Lisa for 500,000 lira. Inevitably, Geri contacted the Italian police. 3 days later, they came here to the hotel and arrested Vincenzo Perugia. When they got inside Perugia's room, they found the Mona Lisa tucked away in a suitcase underneath his bed. And when they asked him why he'd stolen her, Perugia replied that it was an act of patriotism all along. All he'd ever really wanted to do was to ensure that the great Florentine beauty was returned to her rightful home. Perugia was sent down for a year for stealing the Mona Lisa, which doesn't seem very much, does it? But one thing's certain, no matter how famous the Mona Lisa was, before Perugia and his cronies stole her from the Louvre, this prior fame was as nothing compared with the enormous global notoriety that the picture acquired once all those newspapers and all those columns had stopped writing about the great theft of the Mona Lisa. And so our plump Florentine housewife finally became an international celebrity at the age of 400. Because of the robbery, everyone now knew what she looked like, and everyone wanted to know more about her. In 1919, the notorious Dada artist Marcel Duchamp proved she'd really arrived by taking the mickey out of her, giving her a moustache and a goatee, and adding the letters LH or OQ, in French, a naughty pun, which means she's got a hot ass, or as we might perhaps say today, a hot booty.
There is not any single moment where the Mona Lisa becomes the world's most famous painting. There are building blocks, there are stepping stones. So being in Paris is an important thing. Being painted by a Renaissance genius is quite important. Being a femme fatale or being described as a castrating woman would do you no harm. Being stolen was a great stroke of luck. Being mocked by futurist and avant-garde artists was also very important. And being regularly exploited by the advertising industry in order to sell everything from fridge magnets, hotels, flights, and condoms even. All that is a tremendous asset for a girl.
I can't face going into detail about the subsequent growth of the Mona Lisa tat industry. It's too horrible to witness. Instead, let's just visit the house of the world's biggest hoarder of Mona Lisa memorabilia and savor some of the highlights of his collection.
Bonjour. Entrez dans la maison des Jocondes.
My house has become somewhat of a Mona Lisa museum, a shrine, if you like. I have gathered together some of the most beautiful items I have in my collection, like this wonderful photo mosaic here, although the reflection is a bit irritating. These magnificent cushions. These ceramic tiles from China. And this is American. It's called the Giggling Mona Lisa. And this Persian rug. It's a bit amateurish, but still, it's magnificent. And this is something I made myself. It's based on William Tell, but as you can see, the arrow has missed its target.
Once you're famous for being famous, all you can really do is become more famous still. It's the golden rule of modern celebrity. And the case of Lisa Gherardini proves it so clearly. So that's cleared up the mystery of how the Mona Lisa got famous. What it doesn't explain is how she ever managed to be obscure in the first place. How can a painting as wonderful as this ever be obscure? Go on, forget everything you've ever heard about her. Forget the teacups and the posters. Just go and look at her properly. You'll enjoy it. There are a million stories in the world of art. This has been just one of them.